People often ask, what is the percentage of narcissists, psychopaths, sociopaths, and other personality disorders? We see statistics, and we wonder if those are truly accurate. In this video, I want to talk about why I don't think those statistics are accurate and why I don't think they ever will be. According to what I read online, they say about 10% of the population is cluster B. They say 1% are psychopaths, that comes from Dr. Robert Hare's work. 4% are sociopaths, that comes from Dr. Martha Stout. 5 to 10% are almost psychopaths, which comes from a Harvard study done by Ronald Schoten, I think is how you pronounce his name. So all of them, what they say is these are estimates. My question is, where are you getting these estimates and how are you getting them? Because they really don't seem accurate for the reality that we're noticing in the world today. So in this video, I'm going to give you 8 reasons why I think these statistics are inaccurate and why I think that the science is never going to be accurate for this topic. So why is the science likely not accurate? Number 1, the narcissist, psychopath, sociopath is an unreliable character. So this comes from a terminology that's used in fiction and film. They say the unreliable narrator. So this is a narrator whose integrity or credibility is compromised. The recent Joker film is an example of an unreliable narrator. If you haven't seen the podcast episode that I did on that, you can check that out on the Inner Integration podcast. Unreliable narrators and characters typically either have a problem with delusion, mental illness, misrepresentation of facts and reality, outright lying, gaslighting, cheating, exaggerations and bragging, and manipulation in general. We know we can't trust someone who does these behaviors. Therefore, to begin from the very core, that person is an unreliable narrator, is an unreliable character. So whether they're on a therapy couch or they're being interviewed by someone for a study, we can't trust what they're saying because we can't trust that they're going to reveal the truth. If you've been in a relationship with one of these characters, you know how delusional they are. You know they're living in an absolutely twisted and distorted reality. Number 2, they don't usually go to therapy. So the overt types will probably say, oh, therapy or shrinks are for the weak or wimps. It might be that the person doesn't feel they have a problem, that there's nothing wrong with them. The problem is everyone else. So the bottom line is they're not usually likely to go to therapy. So where are they going to get diagnosed? Where are they going to get in the statistics? How are we going to see an accurate representation if they're not getting diagnosed? Number 3, the covert wolf in sheep's clothing is very difficult to see and recognize, even for mental health practitioners, especially if they're inexperienced in real life with these ultra sophisticated and subtle types. So even if that person does go to therapy, it's very likely they won't be recognized. Maybe the statistics include a lot more of the overt types. I highly doubt those statistics include the covert types. Number 4, the institutions of psychology and psychiatry are working with an outdated paradigm. I recently interviewed Dr. George Simon. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put the link up here for you. He talked about this. He said that the studies that they're doing, the whole work of psychiatry and psychology is based on Freud's era, which was the Victorian era, when he says people were very repressed and they had a lot of neuroses. And he said that it's very different from the culture that we're seeing nowadays, which is more based on permissiveness and moral relativity. So what we see is that the science is quite outdated, which means that people who get trained in psychology and psychiatry are not getting trained in this. They're getting trained in an outdated perception of the world. Number 5, some mental health practitioners are cut from the same cloth. So they might be in denial about who they are, they might normalize it because it's normal for them, or they might purposefully hide it because they know who they are. So they're going to be a lot less likely to call out, to diagnose, to recognize these forms of manipulators if they're the same thing. Number 6, mental health practitioners tend not to stack diagnoses on patients. This is something that Dr. Grande mentioned in the video interview I did with him last year. I'll put that link up here for you. So I don't know if that's based on always their fear of overwhelming the patient, putting too much on the patient, or if it's a form of coddling these abusers, intentional or unintentional. Number 7, the institution of psychology and psychiatry sees the term disorder as having the definition that the person couldn't be successful or rise into positions of power in society because of their disorder, which is somehow supposed to make them dysfunctional in the world. Dr. Simon had also mentioned that in our interview. So it sounds like according to their definition of disorder, they wouldn't even be qualifying these abusers as having these personality disorders, because if they're in positions of power or they're successful CEOs, etc., then maybe they're not going to be looking at the personality disorder. And I think that's another cultural thing, is we're living in a world that elevates that. We're living in a world that elevates narcissism, psychopathy in a lot of different industries. Number 8, these characters see themselves as victims. They can be very, very convincing even to those mental health practitioners. So if they see the person as a victim, they're not going to be putting any kind of diagnosis of a personality disorder on them. So from my perspective, the science, the statistics on narcissism, psychopathy, sociopathy are simply not going to be accurate ever. Even if the institution of psychiatry and psychology were to get updated with the times, were to give people proper training, we still come down to number 1, the very core, the nature of the beast. These are unreliable characters. How can we get accurate statistics from people who are always misrepresenting, lying, and manipulating other people? I've mentioned in a prior video Walter Rizzo, who is an Italian psychologist living in Latin America. He writes a lot of Spanish books. He has some of them in English. He says that he thinks it's about 30% of the population that has a personality disorder. I think that's probably a lot more accurate than the 10%. But again, I don't think we'll ever really know. So I hope this video was helpful for identifying some of the reasons why these statistics are probably not accurate. I know a lot of people think about this, they ask these questions, they talk about once they start to see this in the world, they start to notice it everywhere. And the reality is there are a lot of people with these characteristics nowadays in our modern culture, which was very different than the model that psychiatry and psychology is working from. So if you liked this video, give it a like. Let me know in the comments below. If you have something that you want to contribute to this topic, please leave that in the comments below to continue the conversation. I'm sending you a big hug.